eggs. When she lays those eggs, that is considered one clutch of eggs. You might hear me say double clutch or triple clutch. It depends on the species. Side-blotch lizards their role in the environment, they don't really know it, but their role in the environment is food for everybody else, which is similar to mice when you're thinking about rodents or mammals. So they have a really good, they're really good at repopulating their species. So when times are good, they'll fatten up, go through reproduction, lay eggs, fatten up again if there's enough resources, go through reproduction, lay eggs. So it'd be single clutch, double clutch, triple clutch, and really get their numbers back up. But that's basically what that means. All right, that's enough of that. Let's get into the species here. So we have to start with the tortoise. Look at that face. This is one of my favorite tortoise photos. Desert tortoise are pretty amazing creatures. They are diurnal. So diurnal means out during the day. They are herbivorous, so they eat plants. Open habitats from flat lowland scrub to rugged terrain. I've seen tortoises in areas that I would not expect to see tortoises, really rocky areas, really steep areas. I sort of think of them as kind of four-wheel drive vehicles, which are always in low gear. Some of you might know what that means, maybe all of you, but essentially they're very sure-footed and determined, and they can get themselves places that you would think they probably shouldn't be able to get themselves to. They are long-lived, slow to reproduce, which is one of the issues with the fact that they are listed. They are not sexually mature until they're 15 to 17 years old. So that's a lot of summers to get through to finally get to the point where maybe you can replace yourself with an offspring. They do have, like the rest of them, like the rest of the animals out here, they do have thermal constraints on their activities. And like a lot of them, they live at or near their physiological limits. So when you're talking reptiles, you're talking about, they're not like mammals like you and I who sort of regulate our own optimal temperature. They do it behaviorally. So stand in the sun, stand in the shade, stand in the sun, back and forth. But in that spectrum of time of temperatures, there is a little range where they are at peak performance. And that little peak performance range is usually just shy of a slightly higher temperature that can do damage to them or maybe even kill them. So they spend up to about 98% of their lives below ground in their burrows, which means in that remaining 2% of their life, they have to get everything done that they need to get done to not only survive, but also to perpetuate their species, which is not a big percentage, but obviously they get the job done. But I'm really hoping we get to see a tortoise this time around. They're pretty incredible. Like I mentioned, they are a threatened species. It really is not easy to be a desert tortoise. Respiratory diseases, shell disease, raven predation on the young, habitat destruction are all implicated as reasons their population may be declining. The pretty typical spotting in at least the Mojave National Preserve and other areas is the tortoise that's walking across the road. Most of the time they make it across, but with increased populations and people and popularity of places like Mojave National Preserve, that's not really good for the tortoise. But we'll see if we can get our eyes on one. There's a lot of good people out there doing a lot of really good science when it comes to determining population sizes and trends on tortoise. But considering how long they live, it's sort of difficult to really get a grasp on these patterns and trends. It's over decades. If you're a fresh biologist, right out into the field, you're 20 years old, you run across a tortoise, and then 30 years later, let's say that tortoise is also 20. 30 years later, you run across that same tortoise, and both of you are 50. So it's very interesting to try and sort of study generations of animals that live the same sort of span that you live, but collectively the job gets done. One thing we do want to be careful of while we're out is tortoise. They're notoriously known to be slow, but you'd be surprised how fast they can get certain places, especially when you're not paying attention. And sometimes your car is the only bit of shade around. So anywhere we stop, we all want to really make sure we check under our vehicles before we pull off. The absolute last thing we want to do is be responsible for running over one of these creatures. So we just want to work together on that and sort of remind each other to keep an eye on under their vehicles. So Joshua Tree, everyone has their little phrase, check below before you go, whatever works. We just want to make sure we do that. And then all that being said, it's difficult to be a tortoise and it's hard and all these things. I always sort of like to share a couple photos here that a friend of mine took, which was probably the happiest tortoise this person had ever seen. He was so excited, just being poured rain on and just kind of going through the mud. So that's one happy tortoise right there. And then one final warning: if we do see desert tortoise burrows, we can talk about those. We certainly don't want to disturb the animals, just because that's not good. But keep in mind how opportunistic a lot of the things that live in the desert are. In this case, there is a desert tortoise in this burrow, but it happens to be sharing it with a sidewinder rattlesnake. So we will not be sticking our hands down any of these holes anyways, but here's another sort of a word of warning for you. Just, you never know. You never know. All right, let's get into the lizards here. This is a side-blotch lizard. This is one of the most common lizard that lives out in this region. Very generalistic habitat and food requirements, active nearly all year. We're going to run through some of these stats. You're going to see this same collection over and over again, same collection of traits. That is that they are diurnal, so they're out during the day. They are sit and wait predators, which means they do move around, but they sort of find a spot and they just kind of sit there and ambush. They wait for things to come by. And they're also insectivorous. So a lot of these reptiles are feeding almost primarily on insects. Side-blotch lizards are small, so snout to vent, right? The tip of the nose down to the base of the tail is only about 2 inches long. And I did mention they're active nearly all year. This is the one species that sort of breaks the norms or the environmental cues, I guess would be a better way to say it. Generally the environmental cue that sort of wakes everybody up in the spring is it's not daytime temperatures, it's actually nighttime temperatures. And it's a nighttime temperature that is, once it kind of consistently gets over 50 degrees Fahrenheit overnight, that's sort of the cue for things to sort of start moving around. That's usually maybe early April, give or take. And then the flip side of that is usually around October, where the nighttime temperatures start to drop and get lower than about 50 degrees Fahrenheit overnight. And that's sort of when everything else goes down. This particular species I've seen on a very cold, yet sunny, like January 1st. There's no reason for it to be out that particular day, but they wake up and they come out and they sit in the sun and they go back down. But it's kind of interesting. They're the only ones that basically do that. There's lots of different variations on side-blotch lizards. These are all the same species. There's just a lot of different sort of patterns and things. Generally, there's usually some combination of blue, yellow, and orange, and we'll touch on that a little bit in a second here. But there's also a lot of kind of microevolution going on. So if we are in the basalt rocks, the real dark lava rocks, most of the side-blotch lizards that we find will be dark in color. And when we're in the sand dunes area, most of the side-blotch lizards we find will be very light in color. And what's happening there is the dark lizards survive longer than the light lizards in the dark habitat, and the lighter lizards survive longer in the lighter habitat than the darker lizards, which makes perfect sense, but it's kind of interesting to see. But you'll see some weird variations on the right there. About in the middle, there's a striped one, and I usually find those up in the higher country. It's just a different variation, same species. I have an assignment for you, I suppose. I want you guys to look up what rock, paper, scissors means for side-blotch lizards, and we will talk about it this weekend. It's a little funner to talk about when we actually have a side-blotch lizard in our hand. But for being kind of a very common, small, little generalistic insectivorous lizard out here that you just sort of see all over the place, they have one of the more fascinating reproductive strategies. And these are all male lizards, and these are all the same species. There's just different morphs. So your homework is to figure out orange, blue versus yellow, and we will discuss this weekend. All right. Moving on to the long-tailed brush lizard. This is Orosaurus graciosus. I follow this one, the side-blotch lizards, with this one because if you look at all the statistics, the data here, they're very, very similar, but there's one big difference. So they are also about 2.5 inches long snout to vent. They are also out during the day. They are also sit and wait predators. They are also insectivorous. They're almost identical, except for the long tail. And basically they are more specialists. So where the side-blotch lizards are generalists, these guys sort of have figured something out where they live up in the creosote branches, and they are sit and wait predators. And if you look at their patterns, it's very, very similar to the bark patterns and colors. And they just do a little bear hug on the branches and just close that beady little eye and just sort of disguise themselves as part of the plant and wait for insects and things to come by, which is kind of a neat strategy. So when we're out at the dunes, keep your eyes out every time you pass a creosote bush. Just sort of scan the branches, and if you get lucky, you'll see one of these little critters. And there's probably each creosote bush may have a mating pair of this particular species, which is kind of neat. This is the zebra-tailed lizard, Callisaurus draconoides. We're talking about a slightly larger lizard now. We're up to 4 inches snout to vent. Again, diurnal, sit and wait, insectivorous. This particular lizard is notorious for its speed. They've been clocked at 18 miles per hour, which is the fastest lizard in this desert. Pretty impressive, 18 miles an hour for something that's 4 inches long and low to the ground. We're gonna find these guys maybe out in the washes by the lava and out by the dunes. Typically, when you're looking for these, you're not looking for areas that are really heavily shrubbed with lots of big rocks and things like that. The 18 miles an hour, they need big straightaways. So this would be kind of a big wide gravelly wash. And when you see these individuals move and go that fast, it's a blur. It's very impressive, and they are really really beautiful animals. The picture on top here and down on the left, these are both males. So with reptiles, what we'll find is a lot of coloration and real flashy colors and things, especially in the springtime when it's breeding season. And the females are usually more kind of more toned down versions. They'll have the stripes, they'll have the colors, but it's just a little more toned down. But they end up in some cases having colorations that the males don't. And if you look on the bottom right, you'll see a zebra-tailed lizard that has all yellow on the side, and it's got like orange in its armpits. Just these colorations right there communicate to me something. One that tells me straight off that that's a female. I don't have to look at any other characteristics. It also tells me that this individual is gravid, which means it's full of eggs, right? This is a signal to the males in the area who are looking to reproduce that reproduction is already occurring, and they can go ahead and move on to somebody else. Essentially, it's kind of an efficiency thing. And these colors come from basically come from hormones, since she's going through reproduction. So we're going to see an example like this several more times. This is the example for the zebra-tailed lizard. This is a desert horned lizard, a very different looking lizard here. So we go from an extremely fast lizard, 18 miles an hour, to a different type of lizard that is not built for speed at all. Again, we're talking diurnal, out during the day, 4 inches snout to vent. But these guys, they're specialists. They're actually ant specialists. So you don't need to run 18 miles an hour to find an anthill. You just sort of mosey up and just start chowing down. They rely on camouflage, not speed. And 13% of their body weight is stomach, because they need to eat somewhere between 200 to 250 ants per day to sustain themselves. If you think about what an ant is, it's mostly exoskeleton. There's some juicy parts in there, but really not much. Ants aren't really a great food source, and not a lot of other species actually rely on ants, if at all. But this particular species is sort of designed for it, which is kind of neat. And they're fully armored. They've got all sorts of neat colorations. And if we get one of these in our hands, you can feel their back. And there's these little knobs and bumps and things like that, which sort of mimic the texture of the sand that's around them. Their camouflage is really well done. And the only vulnerable spot on their body is their eyeball. So they just sort of walk up to an anthill, close their eyes, and then they'll just kind of peek, find an ant, eat that one, close their eyes, and just, they can do that all day long. Pretty neat animals. Just very, very distinctive, very different than anything else that sort of lives out here. So I'm hoping we get lucky and get a couple of these this weekend. All right, this is the Mojave Fringe-toed Lizard Uma. This is the sand specialist. This is the one that if you want to see this one, you have to go to an area that has fine wind-blown sand. In this case, we're going to Kelso Dunes. This lizard's a little bit bigger than some of the others we've talked about so far. This is 4.5 inches snout to vent. Another sit and wait hunter, insectivorous. But everything about this lizard is built for life in loose sand. Before we move on to some of these characteristics, I just want to point out the picture on the bottom left. If you look at the side of the tail, there's some orangey kind of coloration. That's a little more speckled. Sometimes there's a little bit more. This is another example of a female that is gravid and is communicating with its colors to the local males that if they want to reproduce, they need to go find someone who's not already in the middle of reproduction. Again, kind of an efficiency thing. But let's take some closer looks at, look at that face. It's so cool. They're very, very soft and velvety. I mean, they're essentially being exfoliated constantly because they're just they can literally dive into the sand and swim away under the sand, which is very impressive. That kind of overbite gives them kind of a shovel sort of shape to their face that helps them dive and penetrate the sand. They have little scaly ear hole covers to keep the sand out. They have little scaly eyelashes to keep the sand out. And their nostrils actually point out and backwards. So when they dive into the sand, they don't end up with a nasal cavity full of sand, which is pretty good. And then in that bottom right corner, there's the namesake there. So the fringe is on the toes, which gives them a little more traction. It's sort of their version of if you were wearing snowshoes on a snowdrift, you would do much better than if you didn't. So it just helps them. For most of the other species, that loose sand is just it's just not, they can't do very well on it. So they get to the point, you get far enough into the dunes. Really, the only lizard you're finding there would be for this particular species, and this is the one that we're after when we go there. And I've tried so many different versions of pictures that sort of try to show their camouflage. You just kind of have to see it in person. If you think about sand, it's not just tan, it's all sorts of different little speckly colors. And all of those colors are incorporated into the backs of this particular species. And when you set them down near the sand, they just kind of disappear. It's really interesting. So we'll see how we do. This is the yellowback spiny lizard. We're getting to larger lizards here. 5.75 inches snout to vent. Again, diurnal, out during the day, sit and wait predator. These guys eat arthropods and small vertebrates. So this is a little bit different. They will eat little baby side-blotch lizards and things like that, but generally they're eating insects. This is a species that we will find up in the higher country on Sunday when we go up to Tuatonia. They really like hanging out on the sides of Joshua trees and the granite boulders and things. And they're just really amazing creatures. There's a couple more shots. And the big reveal for these is, if we get our hands on them, is you turn them over and you look at their bellies, which is that picture on the left. So I don't know how many of you have ever seen lizards doing push-ups at each other. It is fun to watch, but there is a function to it. And really what they're doing is they're flashing their colors at each other. And the more coloration that a male has, the more fit that male has. Coloration is sort of an extra, the first energy keeps you alive. The second bit of energy helps you reproduce, and whatever's left over, you can sort of waste on adornments. So if you have a male that has a really bright, vibrant belly, that sort of communicates to some of the other males that maybe he's more fit. More importantly, that communicates to the females that that's a really solid mate, and they will get quality offspring from that. So we can talk more about that this weekend. But that's just, those colors just are amazing when the sun hits them. This is a tiger whiptail, Aspidoscelis tigris. We're getting a little bit larger, so 5 inches snout to vent. This is the second most common species of lizard out here. This is a really interesting one. One of the things that is different here is these are active foragers. Everything else so far has been a sit and wait. This is a very fast, not quite as fast as a zebra tail, but when we see these suckers go, they are quick. They are very intelligent. This is kind of our version of monitor lizards. If you think about big, huge monitor lizards in other parts of the world, this is kind of our version of that. This is a really neat animal, and we will definitely, like I said, this is one of the most common things out there. I should never say we will definitely see these, but there's a really good chance we will see these. And if you look at that tail, you can see the namesake. It's really hard to photograph these because there's so much to them, but their tail is usually about more than two of their body lengths long, which is pretty neat. Here's a couple more shots of them. The picture on the top right is actually a juvenile, which is pretty interesting. The juveniles start with stripes down the middle of their back, and their tail tips are blue. Just kind of for reference, that's a quarter that lizard is standing next to. And as that lizard grows up, the stripes sort of start breaking down into that sort of checkery pattern, and that blue sort of fades out into that kind of dark copper brown. The picture on the bottom is just sort of showing you or reminding me to tell you that this particular species, there are males and females, but this particular genus is kind of notorious for having all female populations in certain parts of the United States. So if you go down into New Mexico, for example, Arizona, there's a bunch of different species in this genus that are all female, and the offspring are basically clones of the adults. It's called parthenogenesis. It's really fascinating stuff. We can talk more about that this weekend if you're interested, but in this region, in this particular species, we do have males and females. And this is one of the species that we borrow sort of from the Great Basin as an example of that. The Western banded gecko, we're getting back to a little bit of smaller animal, 3 inches. What makes this one more unique from the rest of them, aside from just kind of how amazing they are. This is our one and only nocturnal species of lizard. This is also a sit and wait kind of active hunter combination, also insectivorous. A lot of times you find these individuals in kind of the rocky areas, but not always. Kind of another fun fact for these is they store their fat reserves in their tail. So when we're dealing with this particular species, we want to be more vigilant about not disturbing them and making them drop their tail, because if these individuals drop their tail, that's everything that they've sort of been storing up to that point. It's also a pretty good indicator for the health of that particular animal, and maybe sort of the health of the ecosystem in that particular region at that time. So if you come across a gecko with a big fat tail, that's a gecko that's doing well. If you come across a gecko that has kind of a skinny, spindly tail, that's a gecko that's maybe not doing so great. The other thing we can say about this species is they are the only species out that has the capability of vocalizing. I don't know of them sort of chirping in the middle of the night or anything, but when you do pick these up, they do make this cute little kind of squeal kind of noise, which is something that the other reptiles just couldn't do, even if they tried. Here's a couple more shots of these. They're really amazing. And every single time I've held one of these, the same thought crosses my mind. How do you do this? How do you live here? Because they are very soft, very velvety. You can see their eyeballs through their skin. That's that kind of dark coloration there. If you look at the picture on the left, you can see the eggs developing. The females develop 2 eggs at a time, and you can actually see it through the skin. But one of the reasons why something this delicate is able to survive in this region is they've adapted to be out at night and not deal with the heat of the day ever, which is a pretty good strategy, if you ask me. On the top left there, that's what the juveniles look like. They're heavily banded. Once they grow up, sometimes they remain heavily banded, sometimes they get real spotty, and a lot of times they get kind of a combination of that. There's a lot of variation there. So each gecko you find is a little bit different, which is also a lot of fun. Hold on. This is a Great Basin collared lizard, Crotophyes bicentoris. Now we're moving up the food chain a little bit. These next 2 species are considered carnivorous. This is an animal that's 5 inches snout to vent, so pretty good size, out during the day. This is an active forager because they're actively chasing down some of the other species we've been talking about. This individual will also eat a grasshopper and insects and things, but really what it wants to eat are side-blotch lizards and whiptails and basically anything else it can catch. They love life in the rocky boulders. They're stout and muscular, and that allows them to just jump from boulder to boulder and chase down their prey. And their coloration is just pretty amazing. That bottom right corner, I'm cheating a little bit. That is not a species that we get in this region, and that is also not some weird filter that I put on that photo. Collared lizards can get really interesting looking coloration wise, but I just sort of showed that as an example. It's going after a leopard lizard there, which we'll talk about in a second. Those lizards are almost the same size, and that collared lizard will eat that whole thing, which is unbelievable. On the top right, we see some extra orange there. This is yet another example of a female who is gravid, and because of the hormones is communicating through coloration to the neighboring male lizards that, again, if they want to reproduce, they need to go find someone else because she's already in the middle of it. And this time of year, we tend to find we're at kind of at the right time where we get a chance to see some of these extra colors, which is a lot of fun. So I'm hoping we get to see that, especially with this species. This is the other carnivorous species we have out here. This is the long-nosed leopard lizard. This is a bigger lizard. We're up to about 6 inches snout to vent at this point. Diurnal. So what's right out during the day. This is a ground dweller. So where the collared lizard is bouncing from boulder to boulder, actively chasing down its prey, this particular species is a sit and wait hunter. And you would think that a polka dotted lizard is kind of conspicuous, but where they like to sort of find little ambush spots sort of makes sense for the polka dots. If you can think about what a creosote bush looks like, they're real spindly with small leaves. So when the sun shines through a creosote bush, it leaves a polka dotted sort of shadow light pattern that this lizard can sit in and kind of disappear, which is pretty neat. But they're pretty aggressive. I mean, if you're a carnivore and your job is to sort of take down other lizards, being aggressive is a good trait to have. And when they do bite you, it doesn't necessarily hurt, but they don't let go very easily. The challenge is kind of getting them off of you, but we'll see. We'll see how it all goes. Here's a couple more shots of them. The big shot in the middle, all that extra orange, again, is a female, gravid female who is communicating to the world that it is in the middle of reproduction and to basically leave her alone. So we will see. This is a desert iguana. This is kind of this is our logo for our facility here, because this is an extremely well adapted lizard, just top to bottom, just built for this region. This is a larger lizard, 6 inches snout to vent. They're out during the day. They're active foragers. You sort of have to be an active forager if you are herbivorous. If you sit and wait and no plant is going to come wandering by, so you have to actually go out and do your thing. Creosote bush is a favorite. And one of the tricks that this animal has is they have the ability to tolerate extremely high temperatures, temperatures that will force all the other species that we've been talking about down into burrows and into shadowy crevices and things like that. It just gets too hot for them. So with this particular species, 109 for a desert iguana is like 78 and a cool breeze for you and I. It's just that's the sweet spot for them. It also gives them sort of less competition while they're out there. They're not strictly herbivorous. They will also eat, they're opportunistic. They'll eat grasshoppers and crickets and all sorts of other stuff. But generally, they get to a point in the summer where they kind of almost have the whole place to themselves. There's another shot. Just a really, really gorgeous animal. These guys are really cool. They're also pretty dang fast. And I don't have a photo of it, but they will go bipedal when they're really moving, which means they tuck their little front limbs up and they're running just on their back legs. And that big long tail is a counterbalance. So they can just sort of lean forward, and they're so fast when they're doing that. You can hear their footsteps as they're running by behind you. It's really something. Okay, the Chuckwalla. This is the largest species, reptile species that we have, or lizard species that we have in the region. These guys are awesome. We're talking about a 9-inch snout to vent lizard. I mean, this is a big, huge handful of lizards. They're big, fat, and girthy. During the day, these guys are strict herbivores. They are, if you want to find these, you have to find rocky habitat, big boulders. They have a trick. What they like to do is sort of post up on a big boulder that has a couple of big cracks in it. And if a predator gets too close, or if we get too close, they'll just jump down in that crack, and they suck up air. So they blow themselves up. That wedges them against the walls, and their skin is real kind of rough. And so you're adding a lot of friction. So that bottom picture on the right is a lizard that is only maybe 4 or 5 inches in, and we could sort of reach in. We weren't bothering it, but if I wanted to, I could touch it, but there was no way I was going to be able to pull it out of there. And that's their trick. That's their kind of defense mechanism, which is pretty cool. And the picture on the left is a juvenile. The juveniles all start with this really well distincted banded tail, and then as they grow up, the bands sort of fade and things. But these guys are really cool. When we stop at the lava tube or the lava flow, this is one of the species that we're looking for there, and they're impressive when you see them. That's a big lizard. And here's our hero shot. This is old Chuckles. He lived behind my house out here at Desert Study Center for a lot of years, and he would come out of the same hole right around the same time of year, and he was sort of my indicator that the herp season had begun, sort of thing. But that's one of my favorite pictures of him, his big fat belly. Anyways, I believe this is the last one with lizards. Are you guys getting a good feeling about the biodiversity of the desert and the fact that it is full of life and not lifeless at this point? Jeez. This is the desert night lizard. This is one that we'll look for when we get up into the Joshua Tree Forest on Sunday. These guys are really small, 2 inches snout to vent. Even though they're called a night lizard, they're actually out during the day. They're just always underneath logs and fronds and leaves and old cow pies and things like that. So they were sort of assumed that they weren't out during the day. They are insectivorous. They are very secretive. But the trick that these individuals have that the rest of them don't is they do not lay eggs. It's very unique. This is a species that actually has live birth, which is very cool. And if we get lucky, we may find these. There's kind of a trick to getting them, but it either works or it doesn't. But we'll definitely be in the habitat, and we can talk about them more when we're out there. Okay, so that was the lizards. It's kind of not all of them, but that's the majority of them. I'm not going to go through as many snakes, but I want to go through some of these snakes. Hopefully everybody's hanging in there pretty good. I can't. Usually I can see your faces, but I can't see your faces now. So let's just plow through here. This is a western shovel-nosed snake. This is a small little sand specialist. This is something that we may get in the pitfall traps, which is the easiest way to find snakes. Lizards are pretty conspicuous. That's mostly what we're looking for when we're out and about, and we may stumble upon snakes, but generally the lizards are what's sort of easier to find. A lot of the snakes are nocturnal and sort of secretive, and they can feel our footsteps coming. They get out of the way. According to the guidebooks, these guys can get up to about 17 inches. I think the largest one I ever found was about 10, almost half of that. So some of these numbers, at least in my experience in this region, is going to be a little bit smaller. The snake in the hand on the left is a pretty typical size for this species. So nocturnal, insectivorous, and then highly adapted to sandy soils. These individuals will also sand swim, just like the fringe-toed lizard does. The shape of their head is where there's their namesake, and it just they got this overbite, and they just dip their nose down and they just disappear into the loose soil and swim away. It's pretty neat. Another trick they have is they have valved nostrils, so that they can do that without getting sand particles all wedged up into their nasal cavities. Spotted leaf snow snake is another pretty common one out here. 20 inches snout to vent or length is possible, but usually about half of that is what I see out here. Another nocturnal species. Their namesake is that big rostral scale, that huge sort of flap on the front of their face. They use that for something in particular. So their favorite food is either small lizards or lizard eggs, and lizard eggs are usually buried in the sand. So if you like eggs and they're buried in the sand and you don't have arms or legs, you need something to dig a hole. And what they use their face essentially, which is kind of neat. They'll just rub their face back and forth. It's kind of rooting through the sand, looking for food. Gecko tails is also listed as one of their kind of favorite foods. Not to say that they don't eat the entire lizard, but the tail is really where all the action is. It's just kind of funny that it's listed as part of it. But as far as habitat goes, loose, sandy, gravelly areas, which is kind of their sweet spot. Really, really beautiful animals, actually. This is a western patch-nosed snake. This is a diurnal species, so this is one that's out during the day. These guys can get up to about 4 feet long. Pretty big snake. They also have a large rostral scale, pretty much for the same reason. They eat lizards and eggs. But it's just not as pronounced as that last species. This snake, if we see it, it's a flash. They are really, really fast. But we've seen these a couple of times before, so that's one to look out for. One thing I want to point out on these is the size of those eyes. This is a species that's out during the day and very, very visual. And actually, they have that speed so that they can catch lizards on the fly, which is pretty impressive when they do it. They're just lightning fast. It's very cool. Another species that does that even better is this coachwhip snake. Red racer is another name for it, you may have heard. These guys can get 5 feet plus. They don't ever really get girthy. They just kind of get longer and longer and longer. They're these really beautiful, like brick red, orangey sort of coloration. And they always have kind of a black and white checkery sort of pattern right at their neck, right behind their head. Huge eyes, very, very visual. This is a species similar to one of the lizards we talked about. These guys like it really hot, and they really love eating desert iguanas, which is that lizard that also likes it really hot. So it's kind of an example that just because you figured out how to sort of have the place to yourself doesn't mean that something else didn't also. So both of those species are out at the same time. Both are extremely fast, and both of them give each other a run for their money. It's I've seen some pretty interesting interactions between those. It's very cool. Also very aggressive. Something else that's kind of neat, if you get a chance to see it, if a lizard could stand up and look around, this is what it would look like. They'll stick as high up they can, they'll look around, see what they're after, drop down, and then like lightning, they'll just fly over there and grab it. I've also seen these individuals climb trees in a flash, which is pretty impressive if you have no arms or legs. But they just zip right to the top of the tree, which is pretty cool. That happened a couple years back in this class up at that Tuatonia area on Sunday. So maybe lightning will strike twice. We'll see. And then, of course, I couldn't help myself. Here's a Coachwhip eating a desert iguana, which is a big lizard, and Coachwhip eating a tiger whiptail, which is the one on the right, which is actually something that happened. Several students, we sat there and watched that whole thing up at Tuatonia. It was pretty fascinating. This is a gopher snake, Pediophis catenifer. This is another diurnal species, but what's different about this one versus the Coachwhip? The Coachwhip is super fast, super aggressive, just real hair triggered. This particular species is super mellow. If you see this species, you can just sort of walk up and pick it up like a piece of rope. They don't even notice half the time. Every once in a while, if they're feeling a little aggravated, or maybe they've eaten recently, or they feel a little bit threatened, they do have a really interesting way of mimicking rattlesnakes. And I'm going to save that for Friday night. I have some pretty cool videos I can show you, kind of apples to apples comparison of a rattlesnake doing its thing and this gopher snake, actually this one right here, doing something similar but different. It's really neat, but like I said, I'll save that for Friday. This species doesn't need to be fast, it doesn't need to be aggressive, it doesn't need to be high strung, because they just sort of mosey around. They'll follow a scent trail, and they'll come across like a rodent scent trail. So if this snake's out during the day, the rodents are at home in their burrows at night, or out during the day, sleeping, and these guys will just slowly crawl down and find them and make a meal out of them. So they just it's a good strategy that doesn't require a lot of energy, I suppose. This is a Western blind snake. This is the smallest vertebrate in the Mojave Desert. The guides say up to 1.5 feet. I have never seen that. Usually about 4 inches to 5 inches, and about as wide as a pencil lead is what I've ever seen. This is a nocturnal species. They are not completely blind. They have kind of vestigial eye spots, which they don't really see images. They more see kind of light and shadow. And most of the time they're spent either down burrows or just rooting around in the gravel and sand and things. So they don't really need to see much anyways. But they're eating ants, termites, ant and termite eggs and larvae, just really, really tiny stuff. Give you an idea of perspective, that picture on the bottom right corner, that's it sort of wrapped around a fingernail. They're really, really neat. If you get a chance to see them, they're very, very cool. This is a night snake, Hypsoglena torquata. This is an example of a species out here that is venomous, but it's not dangerous to you or I. They are a rear-fanged snake, which means that these snakes are pretty small. They would have to really get a hold of the end of your finger, and you'd have to just sit there and let it sort of try and start swallowing your finger before you even came close to anything close to the venom. And the venom isn't that, it's nothing it would do to you, but it's just an example of some species are venomous but aren't considered in the same sort of realm as like rattlesnakes and such. These guys can get up to about 3 feet, usually a little bit smaller, but I've seen them close to 3 feet. They're nocturnal. They have this really distinct flat head and these really just absolutely gorgeous kind of copper eyes, little eye slits, just really, really neat. They survive mostly on eating lizards and small snakes and the eggs of both of those. And side-blotch lizards are one of their sort of favorites, and mostly probably because of the availability of side-blotch lizards. They're kind of everywhere. This is another species that's sort of a generalist. Almost anywhere we go, there's a chance of seeing a night snake. And if we get lucky with enough eyeballs, we will see one. We'll see. Getting into the pit vipers, the rattlesnakes. This is the Mojave Desert sidewinder, Crotalus cerastes. Sidewinders are famous for the way they locomote. And when people do see them, in my experience, everyone always expects them to be a much larger snake. Usually the ones I see are about 1.5 feet, maybe 2 feet, and real skinny. But they are venomous. This is one that we need to be careful of. We will talk a little bit more about rattlesnake safety when everybody's out here. It's pretty common sense stuff. If you just kind of know where you're putting your hands and your feet at all times, you shouldn't really have any issues. But like I said, we'll cover that a little bit on Friday. They feed primarily on lizards, some small mammals, some small birds, but they eat a lot of lizards. This is a sand specialist, so everything about them is sort of designed for life in the loose sand. And what's really interesting about rattlesnakes, as far as reproduction goes, their strategy is called being ovoviviparous. That means that they do have eggs that they carry in their body, and it looks like live birth when it gets to that time, but the eggs are sort of hatching while they're being laid, and it's just this kind of gooey mess. And it's one way of sort of taking care of those eggs right to the last minute, rather than laying them and allowing them to be potential prey items for different predators. Here's a nice little clip of that really interesting locomotion. Just for the record, sidewinders do not only sidewind, and they are also not the only snake that sidewinds. It is just a very, very efficient way of moving through very loose windblown sand. And what's kind of neat, you have to use your imagination a little bit, but essentially what the snake is doing is it's kind of using 2 pressure points on its length to walk sideways. So it throws this loop of its body forward, presses down, and then throws another loop forward and presses down. So it's kind of walking along, kind of interestingly. It's very cool and very fluid and just really trippy to watch. I really like these snakes. Like most rattlesnakes, they're ambush predators. So they'll just pick a spot and just wait, and they'll wait for days and days and days. Their energy requirements are really low, and they're very, very patient. So in the bottom left corner, that's typically when you come across a sidewinder. They sort of curl up in this, and they're partly buried. They really kind of look like a breakfast Danish, like a little sweet roll that somebody dropped in the sand, the way they're sort of squiggled up. And if we don't get to see the actual animals, if you look on the right bottom corner, sometimes you'll get to see this neat little divot. That was the little ambush spot. So either that was successful and then it left, or it was not successful and it left to go find a different spot. But this is a species that we'll be looking for out at the dunes, and many times we'll at least find their tracks, which are kind of interesting to look at. This is a Panamint rattlesnake, Crotalus stevensi. These animals are absolutely beautiful. Much larger rattlesnake. Much girthier as well, kind of heavy bodied. They get up to about 2 to 3 feet in length. Nocturnal, they're eating lizards, small mammals, and birds, but they are venomous. This is another one that we want to sort of give them the respect, but they're absolutely gorgeous animals. They're a combination of all the colors in the foothills around here. So that desert varnishy brown, tans, and kind of rusty oranges and things. Just really, really gorgeous animals, but we do want to give them the respect that they deserve. This is the one most folks have heard of, the Mojave rattlesnake. You may have heard of them called Mojave greens. They're not always green, but many times they are. This is Crotalus scutellatus. Also a pretty good sized animal, 2 to 3 feet snout to vent, nocturnal. They have a black and white tail bands, kind of a coon tail right near their rattle. They're eating a lot of the same things that the Panamint rattlesnakes are, but the main difference here is the venom. Where the other 2 species we're talking about are hemotoxic venom. So hemotoxic venom is basically pre-digestion. So if you get what that venom is doing to you is it's melting your tissue. The Mojave rattlesnakes have a hemotoxic portion of their venom. Where it gets dangerous is they also have a neurotoxic component. So the neurotoxin is attacking your nervous system, and it's basically trying to shut down all the things that your body does that you don't think about. So your heart beating, your lungs breathing, and so forth. So this is on. They also can be more aggressive, especially when cornered. Like I said, we'll talk a little more about sort of rattlesnake safety, but generally you just want to keep your distance and give them somewhere to go, give them an out. And we shouldn't have any problems with any of these. Okay, that's sort of the end as far as background on the class and background on some of the natural history. We breezed through this really quick. I understand it's a ton of information. We can talk about this more in the field, especially as we come across specific species. We'll really dive in to more of the natural history and some of the fun facts and things like that. I just want to basically kind of finish up with this. So normally this is the first time I'm doing kind of a Zoom thing early, which is interesting. But what I do like about it is it gives us more time on Friday to sort of meet each other and talk about sort of what we're going to be up to. I'll have a bunch of specimens and field guides and field equipments sort of laid out. We can tie lizard nooses. I can show you how to do all that stuff. So essentially you just need to get yourself out here to the Desert Study Center on Friday by 7 p.m. Earlier is better. So we just have a little bit more time. Just keep in mind traffic, I-15, anyone if you're heading north towards Las Vegas, you'll be with everybody else who's heading to Las Vegas. So sort of keep that in mind. And we want to be prepared for a full day in the field on Saturday and a half day in the field on Sunday. And Desert Institute sent a bunch of really good information about what to bring and things, but I did want to cover a couple of those. So essential items, what we offer for you is a room and a mattress, essentially. Well, a bed with a mattress, I should say. You need to bring your own sleeping bag or blankets, sheets, and pillows. You also need to bring your own toiletries and towel. Flashlight's always a good idea. Definitely boots or sturdy walking shoes. We really don't want to deal with open-toed shoes when we're out in the desert for all sorts of reasons. Layers is always good. Looking at the forecast, we're looking about probably upper 90s to lower triple digits. Some of the areas we're going will be a little higher in elevation, but it's going to be warm. You want to make sure you have sunscreen, sunglasses, definitely a hat, some sort of refillable water container, first aid kit, extra car keys, all kind of the basic stuff. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me. This is my email address, so just jwallace@fullerton.edu. Or I suppose you could reach out to Desert Institute, however you've been communicating. It'll get to me at some point, but if you have any particular questions or anything, I think maybe that's all I got. Let's see. Okay. That was a lot of information. So does anybody have any questions? I'm game.
Jason, I have a question. My wife has to work and we're both coming out. We may be late. How late is too late?
Have you been here before?
Yes.
Okay. I thought so. What I can do, email me. I'm still working on rooming assignments. What I can do is I can just let you know what room you guys are staying in. And since you were just here, you don't need orientation and things like that. So I'll just give you your room and then you can come in whenever you like and we'll see you in the morning if that works for you.
Thank you. Well, that'll work fine.